Whew. Here we go. So my history with this album is fairly simple. I heard one track and ignored the rest of it. Much like a lot of people probably did, I'm going to have to admit that bias right away. I had a knee-jerk reaction to the title track to Saint Anger. And I was like, this is awful, and I'm not giving the rest of the record a chance. So maybe some of that is behind what I'm doing now, which is trying to revisit this album, or visit some of it for the first time ever, and give it a fair shake. I should say that some of the choice for choosing this album also comes from the fact that I've been re-exploring Metallica in recent months. I decided to give some of that mid-career material a chance. I've been watching the Some Kind of Monster documentary, I watched the Through the Never movie, some of the S&M performances, and I'm kind of digging a little bit of what I'm hearing. Maybe so or maybe not from this album. We'll discuss that in a bit. But I've been trying to give Metallica a fair shake in modern day. As an old guy, you want to hang on to things like Master of Puppets and Justice for All, and especially Ride the Lightning, which is my favorite Metallica album. But I can't be that old guy forever. I got to put some of my biases away and see if maybe there's some enjoyment in this later material, which there might be. As for public opinion about this album, it is reviled quite a bit by many, many Metallica fans, old and new. Interestingly enough, though, this album sold pretty well. It sold 2x Platinum, which matched the following album, Death Magnetic, and did twice as well as Hardwired to Self-Destruct, which is kind of interesting. Also, Metallica toured this album for 2 years, and there were 4 singles. There was one for Frantic, one for Saint Anger, one for The Unnamed Feeling, and one for Some Kind of Monster. Which means that Elektra had a bit of faith in this album, at least initially. They probably saw the 2-year tour doing decently, I guess. But also Elektra dropped them, or they dropped Elektra, depending. So that's kind of interesting. And there's a gatefold if you've never ever seen it. Yep, that's what they look like. Trujillo in the picture, by the way, he doesn't play on this album. Of course, Bob Rock is the bass player because Jason Newsted left the band and they needed a bass player very, very quickly. So, in case you didn't know that, there you go. One thing I'm going to do to keep this review a little bit more level is I'm going to take the crappy drum sound off the table entirely for criticism. We all know Lars' snare drum sucks on this album. It's sometimes distracting, it's often annoying. It's kind of a given, so I'm going to cease the griping of that now and just cover the music itself. Hopefully, that's fair. So let's get to it. This is the vinyl, track by track. Starting with track 1, of course, is Frantic. Interesting little opener to this album. Obviously, we're getting a lot of James Hetfield, and he's in rehab, and he's trying to get over drinking, and he's got his other problems. There are conflicts in the band. A whole lot of things are going on at this time. I mean, it's probably why the album is Saint Anger in a lot of ways. I mean, their bassist left, and they were trying to get another bass player, but in the interim, they used their producer to do bass. And all of that. And of course, there's an experimenting thing that's happening as well. So a lot of this is chaos and anger. I think Frantic kind of shows a lot of that. I think other tracks are more effective at doing that. We'll get to those. One thing I like about this track, though, it's got a lot of energy to it. Other tracks do as well, but I think this one in particular really has it. Of course, there is the lyric, "My lifestyle determines my death style," which is probably the most unintentionally hilarious moment on this record. Obviously, I don't think it was meant to be hilarious, and it has been the butt of jokes for a while, so I guess I kind of see it too. So flaws aside, I'm pretty okay with this track. Moving on to track 2, we have the title track to Saint Anger. I think that Frantic and Saint Anger are a nice double punch. I think they're the 2 strongest tracks on this album. I have one other track I think is pretty decent. We'll get to that later. But there's a lot of good energy, a lot of good aggression in this track as well. I think it's a little more effective than Frantic at times. I think it also captures some of the energy of older albums. Maybe the instrumentation is different, the production is certainly different, but I think some of that energy is there. There are also some really great riffs in this track. There are in a number of tracks, but this one really has some that I really dig a lot. To be fair, some of this track gets a little repetitive at times. Maybe they could have brought an editor in to bring it down from its 7-minute runtime. I might say editor a bunch of times here. We'll see. So along with a few reservations, I kind of dig this track. So track 3 right away gives us this opening, almost sludge metal riff. I kind of dig that. One thing I don't dig, unfortunately, is James's vocals here. He's got this rap metal thing going on, very new metal. Not digging that at all. Could be a generational thing. I'm not sure. You can write me in the comments and let me know if you like it or hate it. I do like most of the riffs here, when you could actually hear them. They get buried in the mix a lot. The drum sound in particular seems to be a little bit high in the mix. And that's not me bitching about the snare drums. But when you have it that high in the mix and drowning out the others to some degree, it might make matters worse. Also, the track runs way too long, could use an editor, blah, blah, blah. You've heard that. You might hear it one more time or two more times. I'll try to be sparing with it. So the song is okay in parts, decent in rare moments. So flipping over to side 2, we have track 4, and this is where the dumb song titles start. I mean, Metallica is known for some really epic titles. You have For Whom the Bell Tolls and Master of Puppets and, all of those great tracks. And then you have Dirty Window. Yeah, not even trying, guys. So the style jump that happens in this song with the whole judge and jury line, it's a little jarring and unnecessary. It also sounds like it belongs in another song completely. I'm going to go into that later. To its credit, we've got some great fast groove riffing going on here. It is occasionally muddy, occasionally sloppy. Another thing that drags it down. In fact, speaking of dragging a track down, of course, the production. I'm going to use that as an umbrella term in general, but it does make decent songs not as decent. So overall, I'm fairly middle of the road about this song. Moving on to track 5, we have another dumb song title. Also, we have a track that's way too long at 8.5 minutes. And the fact that there's a lot of repetition in this song makes that 8.5 minute time period a little more painful, because the more time you have, the more time you notice, hey, maybe you should change it up a little bit. One thing I found rather amusing about Hetfield's vocal patterns here is that they reminded me, in terms of inflection and such, of Steve Miller, of all people. Yes, the classic rock performer. You'll hear it at the end of things, hear that, that kind of a thing. So that's kind of interesting. Also, less interesting than that is that he's occasionally channeling a little bit of Kurt Cobain in the vocals. There's a bit of whining going on in this song, so that's not too interesting. Also, and maybe this is just me, but this is a rather strange topic for a 40-year-old man to write and sing about. I don't know, maybe he's hanging on to some crappy childhood stuff. I mean, I've heard Dyer's Eve, I've read the lyrics, I know what his childhood was basically consisting of. By the way, Dyer's Eve, far superior track, lyrically and otherwise. So, way too long, way too repetitive, way too whiny. I'm going to say no to this one. Moving on to track 6, we have lyrics that seemingly were written by a 12-year-old child. We might have a little bit more of that on the album, but this is really where you're noticing it pretty hard. And they can do better. I mean, I've heard previous album songs, I've heard later album songs, and this one kind of suffers by comparison. So the choruses are especially painful in this track. James's cracking vocals throughout are even more painful. It really does beg the question, why weren't retakes done at all, it seems? Yeah, it's always going to bug you in the back of your head when you're hearing this album. It's like, you could have done that bit over again. I know, maybe that's the point. Maybe it's supposed to be raw and undone, but why? One thing this song is reminding me of, in terms of all the other songs as well, is that there really are parts of each song that sound like they're meant for two different albums. I mean, you have parts that clearly sound like that brutal thrash metal that Metallica was known for. And on the other hand, you have this sort of grunge, nu metal fusion material. And it really seems like this album doesn't know what it is. So yeah, I know some fanboy is probably out there thinking to himself, well, maybe that's the point. Well, I get it. James was conflicted in his life, so that Saint Anger probably has to reflect that conflict. And that's fine, but that doesn't necessarily make this a good album. I mean, being different and being good aren't always the same thing. So, there it is. So, as you can imagine, this is a definite no for my world. Flipping over to side 3 and track 7, we've got Redneck Rap. I mean, it's kind of nu metal, put on the farm kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, I get it, James. You're sad, and the rest of the world has to pay for it somehow by hearing this track. And a few of the others. To be fair, there are some good riffs on this track, and on all the others. I think the great strength of Saint Anger are good riffs. But good riffs don't make an album, and that's pretty apparent on this one. So I don't think that would save this track. I don't think a guitar solo would save this track. Incidentally, there are no guitar solos on Saint Anger. So, yeah, that. So not much more to say about this song. This is clearly a 0 for me. Moving on. One thing I notice about track 8 right away is that the production is a little better. A little, by the way, not leaps and bounds better. And that's interesting. The inconsistency is interesting. And by interesting, I mean disappointing. So I've got some good riffs on this track. We've got some great energy going on. And I really do like the shift in musical tone to the choruses. And it's funny because I've been griping about that on other tracks, but strangely, it works here. So I'm kind of digging that. Also, we have some more sludge metal vibes going on here. And what's nice about that is that it's fitting the lyrical content pretty well. So a lot of things are working in this song. So I'm not entirely in love with this song, but it's a lot better than the last 5 tracks, and given that, I'll take it. So, okay, I guess it's time for a dad joke observation moment here. The title of the song, The Unnamed Feeling, the feeling is named. It's called The Unnamed Feeling. And I had this stupid similar argument, I guess you will, back in the 1980s with a friend of mine. We were listening to Sam Hain, and the track He Who Cannot Be Named came up, and I'm like, actually, he can be named. That's his name. He Who Cannot Be Named. I know. I'm a dork. Don't mind me. Anywho, moving on to the song, I really feel like the strength in this track is in the lyrics, surprisingly. Finally, we get interesting lyrics. I think they definitely capture what Hetfield was going through at the time with his alcoholism and his other problems. Yeah, again, lyrics on this album, they're actually pretty decent. Who'd have thunk it? And again, the musical shifts in this song, like a lot of the others, don't really work for me. It's a bit grunge. And in 2003, I'm not really needing that. Not that I needed it in 1993 either. That aside, though, this really has some promise as a song. And I think the lyrics are great. I think the sentiment in the lyrics in particular are great. Basically, just drop the grunge and the whiny vocals, and it is a better track. And if you drop all of that, you could probably cut down the 7-minute runtime, which, of course, is too long. So despite the high energy of this track, especially in the choruses, we're getting a lot more of James Hetfield's voice cracking and grunge whining, which I really just don't get. I mean, I don't know, maybe you're in such a state of sadness and frustration that the 90s is where you go for your expression. I don't know. Maybe you need to put on the flannel. I don't know. I've just never been in that headspace, so maybe it's just me. On the flip side, we do get some decent groove metal riffage, so I guess that's better than nothing. But I think ultimately this track is a bit filler. In fact, it's a lot of filler. And that's funny to say given all the crap I talked about a bunch of the other songs. So, yeah, this track's kind of meh. Maybe it's okay/meh. That's my expert opinion. There it is. And finally with track 11, I'm really digging the opening riff, but then it switches to this sort of ambient shoegaze type thing. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm a little conflicted there. Kind of like Hetfield's conflicted on this whole album. And as an ending track, I think I would have preferred a more purely thrash track, something that really accentuates the fact that the album's ending at the point, kind of like Dyer's Eve does or Damage Incorporated. And I know I'm naming past stuff, but I really think that would have helped this album a little bit. It would have bookended it a little bit better. So clocking in at almost 9 minutes, this is definitely the longest song on the album, it's pretty apparent that even though there's a lot of musical change-ups and stuff going on in this song, it still doesn't distract from the fact that the song is almost 9 minutes long. Definitely doesn't. So, I don't know, maybe get an editor, keep the thrash riffs, keep it up-tempo, and basically junk the rest. And bam, 5 minutes of solid Metallica. So here are the point totals, 50%. A little better than I thought. As far as going into this album, I try to leave biases out. I try to be as objective as possible. I don't know how effective I was at that necessarily, but I also listened to the album a number of times, quite a few times, because I really wanted to see why people like this album. At least the people who like this album like it. And maybe also why it's got such hatred going on for it too. And I think I figured out both. And as for any potential biases leaking out here, I gotta say, I have a history with this band. I have a 37-year history with this band. which is crazy once I say it out loud. But, you know, I'm into more than just metal, and I'm okay with bands experimenting on the flip side of all that. I just don't think that this kind of experimenting for this band works in this way. I just don't. And yeah, the album cover. I know a lot of people have said it, but it looks like someone punching a giant butthole. Of course, we should factor in the documentary, such being Some Kind of Monster, which was ostensibly about the making of Saint Anger, but ended up to be more about the conflicts in the band, and maybe some of the resolution, but mostly the conflict. It provides a good context for what's going on the record. Now, of course, does that mean that makes the album better? Absolutely not, but at least you know where it's coming from. And just talking about the documentary a little bit longer, I won't belabor it, is an observation I had that Kirk Hammett is this really quiet guy throughout the documentary, but I wonder if he just takes a back seat in Metallica in general, other than his guitar playing, which is really out front and center. Lars and James, of course, are Metallica to a great degree. And, you know, then there are two other guys in the band, which in some cases might make Kirk, I don't know, maybe the Bruce Kulick of Metallica. Yeah, I just made a Kiss analogy. It's true. And as I mentioned before, the length of this album is ludicrous. I mean, it's 75 minutes long. But you know, if you take out the 3 tracks I gave zeros to, you could bring it down to 54 minutes. And then, of course, all those other parts and the other songs you could shave off. You could bring this album to maybe the upper end of 40-something minutes, which is acceptable. So overall, a conflicted band member helping to make a very conflicted album. But my total was 50%, so maybe I'm conflicted. I'm half and half on Saint Anger, but I'm good with it. And that's my revisit of Saint Anger by Metallica. But let me know what you think about this record. Do you love it? Do you hate it? And if you hate it, would you want to revisit it again all of these years later? You know, maybe? I don't know. Let me know all of that and anything else relevant in the comments below. And if this is your first time here at my channel, this is the Accusation Network, where I do metal vinyl collecting videos. If you dug this one in particular, give it a like, share the video with your friends, but most of all, maybe think about subscribing. That's a cool thing to do, right? So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.